Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the U Talk show, where despite our very unchild safe language, we are for the children. And now, to make every parent cringe, mainly because of my awful, tiny, starved French child accent, today we cover Mama? Papa? Can I trust my union? The answer, surprisingly, is sometimes. Pal, when you're done cracking up laughing, do you want to take how we got here and then I'll take where we are?
Okay. So, the enthralling story of how we got here, ladies and gentlemen. 'Twas a fine winter's night, quite cold, and Kyle was shivering when,
Yep.
during the recording of a different episode, we both came to the conclusion that we should speak about unions. And then we had a huge, not argument, because we don't usually
We
argue, I
had a
guess.
constructive discussion. More on that next
Yes.
episode.
Yes, we had a we had a constructive discussion that was very okay. It felt very tense for me because I didn't think there was a solution until we came up with one. But then we came up with one, so it wasn't tense anymore about what to do. And we figured out that we were going to do a week of episodes about unions, and then this episode to talk about this because Horst absolutely needs to talk about it now
I think
for
we
what I'm
need the
sure are
lead
very
in.
good reasons.
Okay, so what actually happened previously was that I threw some shade at the SDA. The SDA is the Shop Distributive and Allied Employees Association, aka the SDA, aka the Shoppies. And from humble beginnings in the oh, good grief. Okay, from humble beginnings in 1908. So it was, in fact, far earlier than the
Oh,
1950s that I recall.
that's a long
They
ass time ago.
became a political powerhouse. And that's actually what I want to talk about. A union is inherently a political organism. A union nominally serves to represent the interest of workers and to prevent worker exploitation by employers.
Don't
Now,
say
you
that
may
now.
note that I've said
We
here
need to
nominally.
don't say that now. We need to explain that in our episode where we actually tell people what a union is.
Okay, so
You're
I'm
burning through
going to
our
say this.
content, Horst.
I was previously a member of the SDA. Um, I sent them my resignation along with a typewritten letter about the specific reasons that I was leaving. It's the least you can do under those circumstances. I promptly joined the new upstart competitor RAFWU,
What? What is that? Does that stand for anything?
Retail and Fast Food Workers Union.
Oh,
Um, I'm just saying this to give some context. The other thing I will say is that there's a lot to unpack here, and we'll be doing most of it during Unions Week, so stay tuned. I am, despite finding the SDA distasteful, quite pro-union. Kyle is, as I understand, not entirely sold on unions wielding the power that they do. And I'm
if I
going to put
could,
that down to just please do, but I'm just going to say first that between Kyle and I, we are skeptical about a lot of people wielding the power that they hold. That's why we're here. We wish to examine institutions and determine how to make them better for the betterment of all, not just the elite few. So I'm not going to hear anything about people being anti-union or whatever, because we are going to have to look at these bodies and see, are there undue influences? Is there corruption? Is there backroom dealing? There almost always is. But we can make it better. Kyle?
okay. So what you said is technically kind of true, but not intentionally. A little misleading because it's not so much how much power the unions wield. It's the type of power that I'm concerned with.
Yeah.
Namely, I don't want any organizations at all, whether that be corporations, unions, special interest groups, lobbyists, foreign entities. I do not want any of them donating to political parties, candidates, or third party organizations that run campaign ads on behalf of or for or against candidates or parties. So essentially, when it comes to election ads, I don't want people spending money. I don't want those organizations spending money on election ads. I don't want, I want a limit on political donations and a limit on the amount of finance that is put into the political process, and for that limit to work in such a way as to be only more empowered, and I stress only more empowered, by gathering larger numbers of people to that side.
I mean, theoretically, that is how a union works. Theoretically, a union
Yes,
works by having a large amount of people gathered in a common cause to exert pressure on employers to do what it is that the workers require.
yes, but at the same time, them putting more finances into the political process, I mean, it's probably like, I don't think it's as bad as, say, corporations. However, it can go awry. It can be bastardized. I have seen it done.
That's okay. We're going to talk about the bastardization that happened. I'm glad you bring this up because this is a huge part of the reason that I lost taste for the
Oh,
SDA.
just
Initially, it was on
just
moral
before
grounds and not on organizational grounds.
just before you do get into that, let me also state that the way that I think unions can and should be powerful, how I want them to be powerful, is to have more members. Okay, I want good unions to have more members, as many as possible. I think that everyone should be in a union. Every single person in this country. You should be in your union. It gives you better wages. It gives you more bargaining power with your employer. There's every reason to do it, and not really any reason not to unless you are the employer, in which case, well,
Or
you
unless you've
already
been
have a
told your
significant
union is
amount of
the
power.
SDA.
Well, unless you got a shit union as well, which unfortunately there are a few.
Okay, so I would like to tell a tale about the SDA and about part of the reason I left. The SDA was run for many years by Joe de Bruyn, I think was his name. Old Dutch Catholic chap. Allegedly very, very pro workers' rights. Yeah, National Secretary Joe de Bruyn, but also very, very Catholic. Before he led the SDA, he was a senior vice president of the Australian Council of Trade Unions. Um, his union credentials impeccable, but the SDA chose on religious grounds, on ideological grounds, because of the composition of their leadership in large part, to take a stand during the same-sex marriage plebiscite. The same-sex marriage plebiscite should not have happened. I'm going to put it out there. It shouldn't have happened. It was an excuse to delay the legal recognition of same-sex marriages in Australia. And if any of the governments involved had any balls at all, they would have been willing to risk pissing off the Australian Christian lobby and a number of other conservative groups in politics to get us on par with the rest of the world.
To
But they
be
didn't have that. And so we had the plebiscite, and they said, we're putting it to the people, which was an act of moral cowardice.
real,
Kyle?
real quickly, I will give the Labor Party some credit here because it has been their policy, I think, since 2016.
Yep.
To just pass it in an afternoon in Parliament, to just amend the Marriage Act to allow for same-sex marriages. Instead of having a plebiscite, they would have just gone ahead and done it. Skipped
And
the pain that had caused.
I will take the credit right the hell back away from them for the fact that when they had power in 2010, they didn't.
To be
We were already
fair,
behind
though,
the rest of we were already behind the rest of the world at that time.
true, but to be fair, though, we were still dealing with the fallout from a global financial crisis. and there were many other major policy initiatives passed. You can only do so many things. There were four
Apparently, their
massive.
policy was to do it in an afternoon, so apparently they could have done it. But I'm going to get back to the SDA here because this is important. Actually, it's relevant. See, the Labour Party hasn't always been the Labour Party that you know and love. You may have heard things about like the Labour left and the Labour right. Stop it, Kyle. Don't.
Love.
These
Making a lot of assumptions there.
There are internal fragments within the Labour Party advocating for different ends and different goals, as there are in many political parties. You may have heard Turnbull, I think, who said that the Liberal Party was a broad church, and then we got Bloody Morrison, who demonstrated that it was basically entirely a church.
Yeah, it was actually Howard that said a broad church. Turnbull famously said, and I do declare this as famous last words, the Liberal Party does not have factions. There are no factions in the Liberal Party. Which
that worked
we
very
saw
well
was
for
a
him.
load of a steaming hot pile of bullshit.
The Labour Party in the 1950s, was very concerned about communism. The Reds under the bed. I'm going to assume that people watching this weren't around in the 1950s, but yes, people really were that gullible. And in many respects still are. In 54, 55, the Labour Party split into two groups. The Labour Party and the Australian Labour Party anti-communist.
Which turned into DLP, right? Democratic Labour Party?
Bingo! You may remember Bob Santamaria as a person who was largely influential in the workings of the DLP. Now, the SDA was made up of good Christian working folk, and so when the party split, they de-affiliated from the Labour Party, and the fact that a union can have a party affiliation is fantastically broken, by the way. Should never happen. And they bolted their horses to the DLP, who, as it turned out, were anti-communist and anti-social progress. Because apparently, if you're living in the 1950s, everything is absolutely amazing, so you never want to move forward.
What's kind of
funny, the war was over, soldiers were coming back, good food was available again, it was a great time, unless you were, black or gay.
What's kind of funny about is that someone did an analysis, I forget who, and I forget most of the details, I just remember this one detail, and that was that people who really like the 1950s, at least a good majority of them, mostly actually like it because of the economic circumstances back then. You could work at a
time of
petrol
unprecedented
station.
Opportunity.
Yeah, you could work at a petrol station and save up for a house. That's how good it was. Which is, makes me a little jealous, but hey, what else is new?
Oh, I know, right?
Nowadays, you can have 5 jobs and still not afford a house. Thanks, Liberal Party.
The SDA stayed with the Australian Labour Party, anti-communist, until basically the 80s. In the 1980s, they re-affiliated formally with the Australian Labour Party. The big red one, the Albo's in charge now, that one. Because Bob Hawke reached out and was just like, hey, we heard you have workers. You want some good things for your workers? Love Hawke.
You put it that way.
I firmly believe that he was downing a pint while he made that proposal. Utter legend.
I mean, look, that puts a better image in my mind, but honestly, when you the way that it came across to me at first was like he was a guy in a white van offering candy. That's the image.
Isn't that basically all of politics? Politics is just guys in white vans offering candy if you'll vote for them.
You're not wrong, but that still feels very wrong.
So yeah, the SDA was actually a force for good for a while. They were responsible in large part for equal pay for women in 75. because
Nice.
retail went from being a man's job when you went into Gowings, for instance, um, to being a woman's job because the men were off fighting. And the women, of course, were in a new environment and being somewhat sensible, they joined their damn union. And so women still have about 60% of the membership of the SDA, which is, nice. They were also allegedly involved in the 44-hour working week in 45 and in the reduction to the 38-hour work week in 1984. And everything that we worked for back then has gone to shit because capitalist tech bros think that if you really believe in the business's cause, you should dedicate yourself and just work yourself to the bone.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, what the SDA did was they represented themselves as we have all of these workers. In large part, these are people who've gotten into their first McJob, whether it's at McDonald's or KFC or Coles or Woolies, and they've been given the info packet. And the info packet has an SDA sign up form because the managers at those places say, you should be part of a union. Here's the info for your union. You should absolutely join. It gives you power to negotiate with us if you feel that we're doing the wrong thing. While casually neglecting to mention that the SDA has made very favorable deals with those businesses to basically not get the workers very much at all while still having numbers. And
Wait,
they've then
hold.
taken these numbers forward and saying, we're speaking on behalf of all our members who are saying that, you know what, this gay marriage thing, it's not the right time. Casually neglecting the fact that, I don't know, probably 40% of their members were fucking gay.
Okay, so I do remember that, but first, just what you
You worked
said
at
there,
KFC,
it
didn't you, a while
sounded.
back?
Yeah, that was like one of my first
That was
jobs.
many years ago, but did you get the sign up packet with the SDA paperwork?
I don't remember getting it.
Mm,
I might have. I think I don't know. I have a vague memory, but I might have just made it up in my head then. Because I have a vivid imagination.
yeah, yeah.
But okay, I gotta clarify because it basically sounds like the businesses were recommending the union
Yep.
in exchange for the union giving the business favorable deals and not working on
Yep.
behalf of their members.
Yes, and it was in the union's interest to do this because they would then get many members who weren't actually that engaged in the union process. You asked me off camera how our union leadership like dealt with, aren't they voted in? And I pointed out that yeah, they're voted in, but only by the people who actually vote. Like, do
Mm.
you think your average 17-year-old working a McJob has time to like do union politics? The union's a political animal. They had the ability to say that they represented a larger number of people than were actually active within the union. And they negotiated favorable deals with employers to keep that situation going, while nominally undertaking public exercises that are theoretically for workers' rights. For instance, you may have seen the No One Deserves a Serve ad campaign recently. The SDA did a wonderful thing there by pointing out that you should not be abusing retail staff because, for whatever reason, your local Woolworths is out of salt and vinegar chips. Like, really fantastic work, excellent messaging, 100% agreement. But also, that was in 2017, where the only people who were doing that anymore were absolute dickheads anyway.
Yeah, just my mind's still kind of on the whole them basically trading extra membership for what was essentially selling out their membership.
I'm going to make this argument. I'm going to make it once, and then I'm going to feel very dirty. An awful union is better than no union. In terms of the introducing the concept of being part of a union, and that was something that the SDA did that was vitally socially important. And I'm sure that's how they justified it to themselves, that if they could keep the numbers flowing, they could help more workers in the future. Unions are important. The SDA, I'm sure, at the lower levels, did what they believed to be right. Unfortunately, what they believed to be right wasn't. Like sometimes you take a moral stance. We discussed yesterday being offended. Sometimes you take a moral stance, sometimes you're wrong. That's how it shakes out. I don't think that the SDA was involved in some massive conspiracy to screw over the workers. I just think it's the nature of what happened.
To sort of be as nice as I can here, and maybe even fair in a sense, I can see how making compromises like that, for the idea of a greater good.
Yep.
But not necessarily in the same way as the Tau Empire. I can see how making those compromises for the idea of a greater good can lead someone
down
or
a
even
path
a
of
whole
justification.
organization, down essentially a path where they're being more destructive than constructive, but where at least
I'm
in
not
their
even
mind
sure
they're
the
working
SDA
towards
is
something
being.
better.
I'm not sure the SDA is even being more destructive than constructive at the moment. Recent events sort of lit a fire under their ass. They tried to do better. Joe DeBruyn resigned in 2014. The current leadership of the SDA is considerably less set in their ways. And I think in this respect, really what happened is that for the first time in many years, they had competition. I think that the lesson to take away here is that workers having choices applies to a certain extent just as much to union conduct as it does to rights in the workplace. Because a workplace or a union can push you down on the desk and absolutely screw you if you've got nowhere to turn. Nobody else will employ you. There's no other union. Just take it. Whereas when you say, actually, no, there is another place that'll take me. I can get a job elsewhere. I'm leaving. That business no longer has that power. When you say to a union, you're not actually representing my interests, but there is a group that will. You as the worker have power again.
Yeah. I was also going to add to what I was saying before that, in a way, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And you're definitely right that it gives ultimately the worker more power to have more options. In fact, that's actually one thing. I believe we discussed this during the episode "What is Liberty," where I'm not sure if I fully put this together in such a succinct way or a concise way, but if all you have is very few options and all of them are bad, I pose the question: do you actually have liberty? Do you actually have freedom? Yeah, essentially, I guess what freedom is having options, having the ability to say no or yes.
I think there is a certain liberty in being able to decide the terms under which you'll accept being screwed over. It's sort of like,
but again, that's options,
It's sort of like the firing squad, I don't remember if it was Breaker Morant whose last words were "shoot straight, you bastards." Like,
I don't know that story, but you'll have to tell me afterwards because we have run fairly over time. So,
whoops, sorry.
Yeah, interesting discussion though. For now, though, thank you so much for watching. We hope that you enjoyed
join us for Union Week, where we will deliver more tea.
Yes,
Night,
a lot
y'all.
more tea.